This podcast is brought to you by sarahraven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides, so head over to sarahraven.com today to discover even more. Welcome to Grow, Eat, Arrange, the podcast of me, Sarah Raven, and Arthur Parkinson. And we're a bit exhausted, to be honest, because both of us have been at Chelsea today. And this is going out on Thursday, but actually we're recording this on Monday because we thought it would be good to do it super fresh while it's in our minds. So we've been at Press Day on Monday. And as any of you who listen to us regularly will know, we've actually got a stand there, a selling stand, selling seeds and candles and vases and napkins and all the stuff we sell. Plus we have a mini garden. So I just thought before we kick off and talk about the big gardens and all that kind of stuff, I might just get Arthur to talk about whether it's lived up to his expectations, and I might do the same. So let's kick off with our little stand and garden, Arthur. What do you reckon?
Well, of course it has, and it's so lovely to be in it and seeing people today going in it, because I think the thing is with doing a stand when it's just you and a few other people, it almost feels like you're dressing your own kitchen or living room. So you really have to think about the practical as well as the beauty, and I really feel we've nailed it. You know, it was always supposed to feel like the lovely Chelsea shed we did back in 2017, which was in the corner of the garden, and I really feel that people will go in it and think, gosh, you know, this feels like a beautiful oasis of a garden shed full of all our lovely, you know, classic products that you've curated over the years. And I'm very proud of it. It in part reminds me of, there was a children's TV show called Tots TV when I was little, and they lived in a little curious shed with a donkey in the shed, which we don't have. But it's beautiful.
I'd love that.
Yeah, I don't think they'd let us have a donkey though, Sarah, somehow.
No. Even a micro donkey.
Maybe if one day you're allowed to do your Cretan, beautiful main avenue garden that I know is in your head, maybe donkeys could be there on press day somehow. Rescued ones that are rescued from, I don't know, donkey trekking somewhere. Anyway, going off track. But no, it's so lovely because, you know, all of the garden part of Chelsea that's alive for everybody is often years, if not months, done in advance. And I remember going to teach at Perch Hill back in, it was tulip time, so it must have been April, and going into Polytunnel and seeing Josie and seeing, you know, the petunia red velour, and it had just started to come into its first little flush of first flowers, and now to see this incredible like jelly of petunia, it's just so lovely that every plant on that stand really has a story. It's either been grown by Josie and the team at Perch Hill or the lovely team at Rookery. I know Jemima, who has headed the whole thing, you know, she's been at Rookery making the gorgeous silver birch wigwams that are in those gorgeous new pots that you've found. And as usual, I don't know why, I mean, it's good for us. I think we're the only garden at Chelsea to have sweet peas. They're in the Great Pavilion, but they're not growing sweet peas. So I think people are gonna see it and be really touched by it and know that it's you, because it's all our classic gorgeous stained glass colours.
It does feel very sort of us, doesn't it? And the thing is, it's a south-facing site, and the garden is actually, I guess, wow, it was hot today, and it was due to be hot tomorrow, but I just looked at the forecast section. It seems to have cooled down a bit, and a bit of rain tomorrow and Wednesday, and then back to being pretty hot Thursday, Friday, Saturday. But I think, weirdly, it's sort of ideal for our kind of plants, which are obviously annuals mainly, tender perennials a few. We've got a few pelargoniums and dahlias. But the thing I'm proud of, exactly as you say, is that we've grown it all ourselves without sort of fridges and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Very simply done, just as you can as a home grower, really. And 90% of it is from seed and 10% from cuttings, so the pelargoniums. And then just 3 or 4 dahlias. We've got Waltzing Matilda, Sarah Raven, and Totally Tangerine already in flower. And that's just by planting the tubers in March and having them on a heated bench, admittedly, but just a horticultural electric blanket. And they're already in flower. Isn't that incredible? And that's not with any air heat or anything. I mean, I've just been amazed by those. And it is the singles and the anemone flower dahlias. If any of you want dahlias for a June event, like you've got a wedding or a party or something, don't go for the huge-headed sort of cafe au lait ones, which are so fashionable for floristry, particularly because they don't often flower till August. But it's the singles, the anemone flowers that just come into flower so quickly because they've got small flowers, and so I guess it takes less out of the plant to get them to flower.
And so many bees. In fact, I think you'd left, but apparently we had a very rare bee visit the stand this afternoon.
I know that's just literally there were bees coming into the shop to feast on the pollen on the Iceland poppies, as well, of course, on honeywort cerinthe. But, whenever you looked out, the alliums were covered in bees, the cerinthe, the little phlox was covered in bees. I just couldn't believe how many bees somehow we'd managed to attract. So, yeah, I felt proud of that too. And I just think it is the epitome of just out there, outside the window, are all these lovely cut flowers and beautiful colour. And inside, just a metre away, are all the things that if you sear the stem ends in boiling water, I hope they'll last the whole week. I think we might do a top-up if it continues to be so hot in the middle of the week with some things like the lupins, because they tend to just drop their flowers. But it's been really fun. And I can genuinely say not an ounce of stress from me. I think Jemima's probably carried quite a bit of the stress. I'm going to do a podcast with her, actually, because she's really sort of spearheading the beginner gardener new brand sort of strand that we've got. And so she was scurrying about today, having a look for things that are suitable for balcony gardens and small-scale gardens, and for beginners who aren't very sort of, haven't been gardening for 30 or 40 years like me. I mean, you haven't been born 30 or 40 years quite, Arthur, but you've learnt quickly. Anyway, off our stand, which was fun. We had Joanna Lumley. We had Mel from Bake Off. That was nice. It was really sweet to see her.
Missed her.
Oh, did you miss her? Yeah, she was sweet. Anyway, we had various people drifting in and drifting out. It was very nice. But I thought we would divide. It's so overwhelming, Chelsea. Any of you who have been will know that you just sort of come out and it's just sort of overdrive. You just almost don't know where to look. But those of you who haven't been, you sort of arrive, and I know we have quite a lot of people who listen from abroad who probably haven't been to Chelsea, but you arrive usually into a normal retail, sort of almost like a shopping street, like a high street with the retail people straight away, under an avenue of London plane trees. And famously, there's this thing called Chelsea cough, where the pollen really makes people's hay fever go haywire in May. So this is sort of the peak time. Anyway, and then you turn off to the right, and that takes you onto Main Avenue, which has the really spectacular, big budget, really sort of socket to you, incredible gardens, which we'll come back to. And then you carry on, again, over to the right to get into the main marquee. And what Arthur and I thought we would do is I would concentrate on looking at the things that I found inspiring in the main gardens, and Arthur would concentrate on the things that he found inspiring in the marquee. And so we're going to sort of dot between the two of us and jump between me talking about themes in the Main Avenue gardens and then Arthur. And then we're going to pick up some themes in the next couple of podcasts, I hope. One, Tom, who's our head of horticulture, and he's got this beautiful small town garden. He lives in Ely, actually, not in London. And he's going to select some things. And then Jemima is going to select some things for the beginner gardeners. So we're actually going to do, hopefully, 3 podcasts from our time at Chelsea, because, of course, we're there till next Saturday evening. So it's quite a long haul. Anyway, do you want to start, Arthur? And then I'll come back to the Main Avenue. But I've been rabbiting on quite a bit now. So why don't you start with, either your favourite or the thing that you want to talk about first that you saw in the marquee?
Well, the thing about the marquee, it's really funny when I first went to Chelsea, which was a while ago now. I remember getting on a coach very early morning and getting spat out onto a Thames Street onto the show. I remember feeling the marquee wasn't that interesting, which was a complete mistake, because you have to look much harder, I think, in the Marquee to find jewels. And actually lately, I think they've got much better at encouraging smaller nurseries to be involved by giving them smaller areas to display their plants. And what I love is you meet independent nurseries and people who really just love what they're displaying and growing and showing the world. And one of those nurseries that hold the national collection of Comasias actually is Hare's Spring Cottage Plants. And I've really fallen in love this year with Comasias in pots. Bizarrely, I've never grown them until this year. I always thought there was something that you planted in the lawn as a bulb. But actually, they've been amazing in my pots. And I've combined them with Geum Totally Tangerine, but they'd got them with Geum Scarlet Tempest and a smaller, really royal blue Camasia called Maybelly, which wasn't too tall, so it really matched the Geum. So I'm going to copy that for pot combinations this autumn for next late spring. So yeah, they were the first. It's lovely that some of the stands are almost pretending to be a flower border, and others are very, almost like treating their flowers as if they're livestock and chickens at a country show, everything's single stemmed. But I think I do prefer the stands that try and make it look like it's a flower bed. Mm.
Yeah, exactly. So they're recreating a border, aren't they? Yeah. Good. Gosh, I missed that. So I'm back tomorrow morning at 8:00. So before it gets busy, I'll head straight to have a look at that. That sounds
I'll show you it then.
Lovely. Yeah. Because we've got Comasias in the orchard here. And actually, there are a couple that we've put in. I don't know what they are. So maybe I'll go out in a minute and take some pictures, and then I can identify them from the National Collection. But I love Comasias for this thing, which is once the tulips go and the alliums come out in the garden, the Comasias can fill your grass. And they have started seeding all the way through here. They really have, along with that lovely magenta Gladiolus, byzantinus subspecies communis. And they're both really happy here on our clay. And so, I really want to. I said to Josie when we were walking around and doing our sort of assessment, which we try and do every fortnight or so, more Comasias and more Gladiolus in the long grass, because they look so good with the sorrel, which is just coming up into flower now. And of course, cow parsley, which is really looking so nice. I mean, I left the show because I just wanted to come back because I'm in London at Chelsea for the rest of the week, but I really wanted to have an evening here when it was just such beautiful weather, and partly to see the Comasias and the Gladiolus in the grass. Anyway, so on to Main Avenue. So this is where the big budget guys are, and 6 out of 7 of these big budget gardens have actually been funded by the most amazing organisation, which is a charity called Project Giving Back, and it's about gardens for good causes. And it's the most incredibly positive in all ways charity, where what they do is that they encourage other charities to submit their ideas for marketing purposes. So whether it's muscular dystrophy or the National Autistic Society or whatever, or the NGS, lots of charities asked to submit their ideas for having a garden at Chelsea as a way of getting and spreading awareness for their cause. Because, when we all hear that thing on Radio 4 on Sunday morning, which is an incredibly good thing too, where a celebrity is the proponent, the protagonist for a particular charity, it is easy to glaze over somehow. But if you see a garden that represents that charity in some way, it has such huge reach because of the television, worldwide reach. And what happens is that benefactors and small donations really do come in as a result. And I was chatting to the guys who run the charity, and they say that they've just got such good evidence that having that marketing sort of front, Hattie, who's their CEO, was just saying it's had such incredible positive effect on, for instance, so many actually, I don't even need to name them, but lifeboats and all that. So it feels really positive that you're there looking at this garden, but also it's really drumming up interest in them. Anyway, I'm going to go straight in and tell you which I felt was movingly beautiful. And for me, I just couldn't fault it. and it was Tom Stuart Smith's garden for the NGS. And that's one of the ones that has been backed by the project Giving Back. And it's right on the top corner of Main Avenue. And I have a feeling that it will win Best in Show. And so I'm not being in any way radical in saying it's beautiful. But it was interesting. We were walking up towards it from the other way and turned the corner. And there were these azaleas, these sort of creamy ivory azaleas. To be honest, not one of my favourite plants, but of course scented in May, and they do fill the May gap, but a very subtle coloured form. And then above them were these incredible hazels, and they weren't coppiced so that they were breaking from the ground. They were actually stools, so there was sort of 2 foot, say, or just under a metre anyway, of main stem, and then they had been chopped to that level to then encourage these really substantial side branches, basically. And so that is a different technique. And actually, I loved that because it lifted the canopy a bit higher. So you got these domes of azaleas and then this beautiful dappled light of the emerging hazel leaves. And then underneath, this incredibly sophisticated carpet of shade-tolerant plants. And I found that so exciting because it was, there were the usual things like foxgloves and dicentras and sort of glenias and things, but there were lots of other really unusual and exciting things which makes one sort of think about things in a different way, and about shade planting as being such a subtle and beautiful thing. And the nuttery at Sissinghurst at the moment is similarly breathtaking. And it reminded me rather of that. I don't know if it had been inspired by that, but there you get sort of trilliums and carpets mixing with smyrnium, mixing with Martican lilies. And it's the most incredibly beautiful and sophisticated shade planting. So yeah, for me, that was my number one. And at the back of it was this exceptionally beautiful shed. I mean, you couldn't call it a shed, really. It was a house made from green oak. And the genius thing, it was actually designed and made by Tom's son, who's called Ben Stuart Smith, who's an architect. And he had not just light from one side, but from 3 sides. And what a difference that made. So what would be classified normally as the back of the shed had a big window looking out onto a hedge that, of course, was embroidered with lots of interesting things. But that was so clever because normally in sheds you get this sort of blank wall, but it was like a beautiful painting on the dark wall as well. So yeah, I walked around and walked around again and walked around again, and never did I tire of it.
And I think a lot of the plants are donated, aren't they, from various NGS gardens? It's been quite a long... I remember, because I know one of the gardens that donated some Solomon seal, Chip's man.
That's it.
At Oxley's garden, she was taking up, back last year, some Solomon seal, completely dormant. And she was really excited, saying this is going to Tom Stuart Smith and they're going to divide it all up and it's all going to be for Chelsea. So I think people will love talking to the people that are going to be on that garden during the week, because I think it's all the NGS volunteers. They're all on a big rota. So all the NGS ladies and men will be there to talk to. And I think people will love that. And that will, not only will the garden look gorgeous, but there'll be a lovely sense of it being part of, everybody's garden in a way. So it's got a lovely story to
where
it.
It's come from. Yeah. And before I move off and we go back into the Marquee with you, the other key thing of Project Giving Back is that every garden has to have a destination. So they're not just broken down and sort of, like in the old days where lots of things were sold off, or even, I'm afraid to say, sometimes skipped. They're not at all. Everything is taken down really carefully and then rebuilt in a destination. And this is going to the Maggie Centre at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge. And the wonderful shed that even has an Arga in it is going to be for family and friends of people with cancer and terminal illness. And so it's very rounded, as you say. You've got Chip's man's Solomon seal coming up, into the garden in the autumn, the garden full of lots of people's growing stories, and then on it goes to sort of soothe the life at a difficult time of lots of other people. So really, really great story, I think, and we'll know at sort of 8 or 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. But I kind of imagine, I can't sort of think that won't, it'll certainly get a gold medal, but whether it gets best in show. Anyway, back to you, Arthur, in the Marquee.
I was really delighted actually today in the Marquee to find some flower arrangements that I really loved and would have loved to have taken home and had by the side of the bed or on the kitchen table, because I will be honest, sometimes you do look at the floral arrangements and they're not exactly what me and you create sometimes. But there's a florist who did 3 gorgeous arrangements in a trio of, you know, those huge conch shells. There was like a huge daddy conch shell and then a mummy shell and a baby shell. And they'd all got a beautiful, they were filled with water and some chicken wire, I believe. Not oasis, because oasis isn't allowed to be used rightfully anymore. But within them was a flower actually that I can tell is completely bizarrely out of fashion, which was honeysuckle. I didn't see any honeysuckle on the main avenue today or in any of the show gardens, which I find a bit odd because it's a nice time of year to have honeysuckle in the perfume. But anyway, in her shell arrangements were these gorgeous tendrils of honeysuckle, and I've really loved honeysuckle this year. It's so worth growing for wildlife and as a cut flower. You just cut a few sprigs of it and it will come to life at night. It will fill your bathroom or your bedroom with this most gorgeous scent. And she also did one of the gate arrangements at the show as well. So I think it's the gate nearest Sloane Square that she's covered in beautiful foliage and very dark bull's red peonies and lots of beautiful roses, all again, not in oasis. And it was amazing during the build-up watching these gates slowly be padded out with foliage and flowers, using a lot of buckets, those strategically placed. So each bucket was hidden and then slowly filled with flowers. I mean, it's going to be such a hard week for them because it's so hot. I mean, if me and you had done anything purely involving cut flowers, I think we both wouldn't be doing the podcast now. We'd be cutting and conditioning. So I feel for people who do floristry at Chelsea, because to keep these things alive and looking good, you're literally having to, replace and condition every 48 hours almost. So yeah, look out for Poppy's arrangements this week.
Great. Yes, again, I'll go and find that tomorrow. So the next one that I wanted to highlight, and it does feel a bit brutal just talking about a few, but we can't talk about every single garden in the place because there are tens, if not 100. But the next one that I wanted to highlight was the Octavia Hill garden. And Octavia Hill was one of the founders of the National Trust, I think. And she was a sort of social reformer. Anyway, interestingly chosen by Anne-Marie Powell to kind of be the name of her garden with Blue Diamond as her backer. So it's the only one that's not backed by Project Giving Back. And I loved this particularly for its planting. So there were, right out the front, there was a very brave and beautiful combination of a baptisia in a dark chocolate brown, and then a single somniferaum poppy. So again, dark, rich colours. And then this amazing bearded iris, which actually I grow here, called Raja, which is gold and chocolate. And the combination of that and an asphodel, I think their Latin name is asphodeline, I think. But anyway, so which I see in Greece a bit. And it was brave because it was really, really strongly contrasty. But for me, interestingly, fitted totally in what I call my dark, rich palette, where I have crimsons with gold. And it doesn't work with primrose because primrose is too wan, but with a really rich gold, like in the Raja iris. I thought it was radically beautiful. So I was really, really keen on that with the spires of the baptisia. And then the other thing that she had had used this incredibly sort of brassy kind of tangerine with a bit of white in it, another bearded iris, which she was funny about it actually to me. She said she thought yuck when she first saw it, but then she sort of suddenly saw it with geums and things under planting as she was walking past, rejecting this bearded iris, and then plopped it in. And it was true. It was very brave and strong. And it was, I'm not going to use the term marmite because it's overused, but it was, people will either love it or hate it. It will definitely raise a few eyebrows. So I thought her colour combinations were bold and exciting and definitely, real head turners. And also she had really thought about form in her plants and flowers. And there was an allium right at the front, sort of arching over some geums. And it's an allium that I've grown here called Floral, which, to be honest, is slightly more exciting in bud than it is in flower. It ends up like a big spherocephalon, so one of those small-headed alliums. But when it's in bud, it has these crazy arching shapes, sometimes, literally curving 2 or 3 times. And it stands proud and high. And so you get these really exciting, crazy curves. So allium Floral is definitely something that I'm going to put more of in the garden here, because we trialled it a few years ago, and because the flower wasn't the most exhilarating, we decided not to include it, but I'm definitely going to include it again. And the other thing that she pointed out to me in the same way with a very bold form was that golden globe flower called Crespedia. And it looks like little golden sort of nugget footballs. And again, she'd use that hovering above, I think Geums again. But I love those layers of shapes that she used, both quite at the front of her garden. So for me, the planting really stood out on Anne-Marie's. And I went back to look at it 2 or 3 times. And, it was complex. And again, like Tom's, sophisticated and exciting. I mean, Tom's was very calm, all whites and just the odd splash of mauve and greens. But Anne-Marie's was exhilarating, some of the planting.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
Back to you in the Marquee.
So I actually was enjoying looking at some of the charities, the sustainable charities that are part of the Marquee, and one new one is called Rootful Textiles, and they're showcasing the amazing ability of using grassroots as a textile. And their stand was really exciting. They'd got like these lampshades that looked like wasps' nests or almost like beautiful butterfly cocoons that were completely made out of grass. And their stand was all about how water efficient using grassroots is, because it's basically a byproduct often of animal feed, actually, according to their stand. I didn't know that. So there's lots of beautiful, sustainable things that weren't necessarily showcasing plants, but showcasing what plants can do for the world as we change rapidly to be more sustainable and survive. And the other thing that I loved was one of the oldest stands, which is the Botanical Nursery and Gardens. And they've been at Chelsea since 1999, and they've had over 30 medals, including the Queen's Jubilee Medal in 2012, because what they showcase are foxgloves. And I know foxgloves are probably a bit cliche now for Chelsea because they're out in full force when it is Chelsea, so that's lovely. But it's easy to forget the amazing variety, the subtle variety actually, that foxgloves come in. And for me, being a Beatrix Potter lover, I just love foxgloves in all their forms, really. But it was lovely to see Pam's Choice amongst all this apricot and classic pink. And Pam's Choice, if you haven't grown it, it's got the most incredible, any of you that like Muller Fruit Corners will know the shade of blueberry, naughty, full of sugar syrup that you get in a Muller Fruit Corner on that little triangle. And each throat of the flower is that really beautiful, dark blueberry purple. And if you fall in love with foxgloves at Chelsea, the nice thing is now is the perfect time to sow them. So it's nice to leave Chelsea and think, right, I've seen those at Chelsea, get the seeds, sow them, and you'll have them for next year. And foxgloves are one of those plants, like all the biennials, to be sowing now.
Yeah. We should just put an NB there, shouldn't we, really?
Yeah.
Biennials. So now is coming up for the time to sow your Iceland poppies. That was the bestseller on the stand today, the Iceland poppy seeds. Digitalis, Sweet Williams, Hesperus,
Yes.
both Hesperus matronalis alba and the mauve Hesperus, which are looking incredible in the garden here. Interestingly, about 10 years ago, that was all over Chelsea, and there's hardly any of it this year. I noticed that.
And I didn't see any. I mean, you'd think there'd be stands of Iceland poppies in the Grand Marquee.
No, there used to be a whole stand for Iceland poppies, didn't there? Yeah. I mean, that takes me off my subject in a way. There were people sort of chatting about the fact that Blom's bulbs weren't at Chelsea this year. And apparently they sent out an email to all their customers saying it was just prohibitively expensive for them to do it now. Because it's, you've got to put up all your staff in hotels in London. The cost of transport is so expensive, and it just doesn't make sense. So I guess the RHS is going to have to think about that if big, very well-established nurseries like Blom's aren't going and are sort of slightly campaigning to their customers. It's quite a thing, isn't it?
And at the same time, I suppose with sustainability, and I think a wider knowledge of gardening and what is in season, is it right to have all these freezers on? Having all these things out of season for a flower show. So in a way, it's sad to not see a tulip in nearly June. But I think we could also ask ourselves, is it right to see a tulip in June? So yeah, it's opening up questions, which I think is good for the wider conversation.
Funnily enough, I said freezers in our previous one. And of course, if they're in a freezer, they'd be dead. It's fridges, isn't it? But, cold stores.
Who knows what they do? Witchcraft.
Yeah. Yeah. So the next one I just wanted to mention was the National Autistic Society Garden. And this one was designed by two people, Sophie Parmenter and Dido Milne. And I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce Sophie's surname, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Well, I hope she doesn't mind. The thing that I thought was really noticeable about that is I've talked about shade in Tom's garden. It was all shade. And there was quite a lot of damp planting this year. I noticed that people seem to have really focused on ponds, which of course are fantastic for biodiversity and for sustainable gardening. But the absolutely stunning front of their garden was full of candelabra primulas in the most beautiful range of sort of peach, pink, gold. And it's funny, they're a plant that was so fashionable sort of 40 years ago with Mecanopsis and all those sort of plants, 30 or 40 years ago. And they've really gone out of fashion because I think they're thought to be too sort of dolly mixture. But I was really pleased because, they must have used, I don't know, must have been about 100 plants, 50 to 100 plants right at the front of their garden. And it was absolutely deliciously beautiful, I thought. I thought that was a real stroke of genius to do it so en masse and so bold. I took my hat off to them for that. And they are, of course, a really perfect plant for flowering in May and June. So again, sustainable because they wouldn't have had to be forced, etc. So I thought that was a really fab idea. Back to you in our ping pong match round the Chelsea Flower Show.
Well, I love a pond, and in a way, ponds are quite difficult to get looking gorgeous this time of year. The water lilies, their pads haven't expanded fully, and they're only just coming into bud. So it was lovely to see a stand by Lincolnshire Pond Plants, showcasing a whole array of beautiful marginals and submerginals and water lilies. And we'll probably do a podcast soon on pod plants because we've got our own range that has launched this summer. But I think it's important more and more that people realise even a small amount of water is just a magnet for wildlife. And it doesn't have to be a boring part of the garden. It can be just as diverse as an herbaceous border if you get the right array of plants, from marginals to water lilies to submerging oxygenators. So it's nice to see a pond in the Great Pavilion, because can you imagine the stress of not only having plants to deal with, but with water as well? Yeah, a lot of stress for people who are doing anything aquatic. So I take my hat off to that kind of display.
Yeah, great. So my second from last highlight on the main avenue was Maria Harris's garden for the Stroke Association's Garden for Recovery. This was another one funded by Project Giving Back. And so in Maria's garden, she had one border that was devoted to sort of blues and cool tones. And it was really, really lovely, soft and beautiful. And it had things like salvias and baptisias and geraniums and this lovely linum, the flax family. And that was one border, very much separate from another border off to the right, which was a very beautiful bronze palette. And, using quite sort of standard May things like verbascum and a broom and geums. But the two swathes of these two very, very harmonious palettes with different flower forms, I stood and looked at that for ages. I thought that was a really beautiful, beautiful bit of border planting, and felt very recreatable and very kind of, just, I hate to say it because it sounds sexist, but I somehow knew it was a woman that had done it, and a woman who was a painter. It was incredibly painterly and delicately and beautifully done. So over to you, Arthur, on your maybe second from last, or perhaps your last thing in the marquee?
Well, I'm not. I hope it's the right thing you told me to go look at, because I was told Sarah, you saw something about mushrooms. I think I found it.
Yes.
Which was bizarre because I watched last night, because I'm staying with Caroline in London, who's also on the stand, so she's letting me live in her flat for the week. We watched an episode of Clarkson Farm, where Jeremy Clarkson and his lovely wife are propagating, I suppose is the right word, or farming mushrooms in this like underground wartime-like place. And what they're doing is getting the mushroom, the cells of the mushroom, the fungus, in these bags, and they make a cross in the bag and have to put them in the mushroom tunnel that's filtered with air, and they're growing mushrooms. And there was a stand showing that process, which I found amazing, that you can just get this bag, make a slit in it, add some water, and it activates these mushrooms. And I think due to Jeremy Clarkson, it's becoming the thing to do. It's the new grow your own mushroom, which completely, in many ways, makes complete sense, doesn't it? And apparently you can keep harvesting the mushrooms off these bags. I mean, it's quite remarkable, because mushrooms are not the cheapest thing in the world. And
no, yeah. and you don't need much space, and they can, some of them like the dark. The stand that I saw was the Cayley brothers, which slightly bizarrely is run by two sisters, but that was in the Marquee, and just these crazy sort of sculptural fungi growths I found quite exciting. But yeah, I think mushrooms are a new and, again, good sustainable thing to grow. And of course, you can't use chemicals, because if you use fungicides, they wouldn't work, would they? So the final thing that I wanted to highlight was another very, very beautiful garden in shade again, designed by Ula Maria. And it was for the Muscular Dystrophy Society. And it's all based on this thing which sort of sophisticated Londonites that come and stay with us here at Perch Hill say, can we go and do some forest bathing? And we don't know what they're talking about. And basically it means going for a walk in a wood. But it's quite grand, forest bathing. But the whole thing is that apparently as the trees are photosynthesizing, it's incredibly good. The whole kind of gaseous exchange with your body and everything. Anyway, I'm not taking the mickey out of Ula at all. I can imagine, if you are disabled, and muscular dystrophy is, of course, the most devastating disease, being able to either steadily walk or be pushed in a wheelchair through this very gentle, not baking hot, shady, pathed garden with, lots of classic things like foxgloves and all underplanting the silver birch. Yeah, and euphorbias. And I thought it was very subtle and calming, and that was exactly the point. So, these big themes of these whopping great trees. And it was interesting, I was actually chatting to Peter Clay, who's one of the partners of the company Crocus, and he was saying, it's actually their last year for doing gardens, but he was saying that the really strong gardens on Main Avenue are based on their trees. And as a designer, if you choose your trees first and then everything goes from there, you're onto a winner. But certainly in both the Muscular Dystrophy Garden and the NGS Garden, which were both Crocus gardens, they were very much trees were at the fore. Anyway, there were so many other wonderful things, but we must finish now because we've been rabbiting on already for 40 minutes, and we tend to do about 25 or 30. But I guess what we're both saying is it's fun. If you've got tickets, I hope you have a lovely time. If you haven't, I hope we've given you a little bit of a picture, and maybe plan to do it next year.
Yeah, take some cough sweets for the plain pollen dust, and if you can, a nice flask of water would be my advice as well. And have a lovely day if you're going. And please come and say hello to us on our stand. We're there till Saturday.
Fabulous. Thanks very much for listening to Grow Cookie to Range with me, Sarah Raven, and Arthur Parkinson. And we will see you next week. You can find more information, photos, and advice sheets on all the plants and recipes we talk about on this podcast by heading to the show notes or at sarahraven.com/podcast.